Hey guys, Mr. King here. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about ecosystems. And we talked a little bit about ecosystems when we were talking about oceans, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more and we're going to get a little more specific about the parts of an ecosystem and the type of interactions that happen within an ecosystem. So first off, we got to get a basic definition of what an ecosystem is. And an ecosystem is made up of organisms interacting with one another and non-living factors to form a working unit. So it's not just the things that are alive. And a lot of people think of the most important things as being the living things, but really you have to have a balance of both. A basic non-living factor in an ecosystem would be oxygen for us. And without oxygen, we are not much of an ecosystem. We would not be able to survive. Sunlight is another example of a non-living factor which contributes greatly to ecosystem surviving. We studied oceans and we talked about how the sun warms the water next to the equator and how that warmth spreads out throughout the water by the different types of currents, and that warmth gets spread out to different countries as well and impacts their climate that makes it so people can live there. And so the non-living factors are just as important as the living factors. So we've got interactions within an ecosystem, and the first type is where you have two living things interacting with one another. And the most common type of interaction that we're going to come across is feeding interactions. Things eat each other, and that's just part of survival. And so a frog eating an insect is an example of two living things interacting, and you can see in the picture here, he's going to get that grasshopper there, it looks like, pretty easily. And that's a very important part of how an ecosystem functions, is you need to have an appropriate number of predators and preys, or things that are hunting and things that are being hunted. So if you have a pond which has 500 frogs in it and only has a couple grasshoppers, the frogs are not going to be able to survive there. They're going to have to go and find someplace different to live. On the other hand, if you have 500 grasshoppers and only one or two frogs, you're going to have some pretty fat, happy frogs, because there's going to be very little competition for the food, and they're going to be able to catch as many grasshoppers as they want. So they can just lay around all day and get fat. So that type of interaction is the most important, and it's the most common. Without things eating each other, the ecosystem would not be in a balance, and things would not be able to survive without eating. Another type of interaction that happens is living things use a non-living part of an ecosystem to interact. And so a frog could use a stream as a place for shelter, or it could also use it as transportation. It could get in the stream and float down the stream to go to a different place. But that's an interaction between a living and a non-living thing, and that happens all the time. Organisms that are alive are breathing in oxygen, they're walking on the soil, they're swimming in the water. All of those interactions are between living and non-living things. So when you think of an ecosystem, don't just think, oh, it's only the living things that really matter. It's not. There's a lot of non-living factors that are really important in helping the ecosystem balance itself out and helping things survive. So ecology is the study of all these interactions. That's where we get the word ecosystems, and ecology are very similar. It's the study of how all those interactions take place among the living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. And as this picture shows, you got a person in a car up there. It's not just animals, it's humans too, and we're a huge part of the ecosystem of the earth. And we make a significant impact on our environment. And sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative. But we are definitely a key role in the balance of an ecosystem called Earth. And if we don't eat the right amounts of things, and if we pollute too much with our cars or our factories, the whole balance of the Earth is thrown off. And there's a lot of different things that can happen if we don't take care of the Earth and we don't take care of the balance in the ecosystem that we need. So it's not just animals and non-living things, it's us. We're not just talking about nature. An ecosystem is a school. It's living and non-living things. Every time you guys come into my class, it's an ecosystem. When you sit down at the tables, they're not alive, but you interact with them. If you didn't have tables and chairs, it would be pretty difficult to come in and learn. If you had to sit down and do work by laying on the floor. It might be cool at first, but then it get kind of uncomfortable. So you interact with tons of non-living things throughout the day and living things. Every time we talk in class, we've got two living things interacting with one another. And so all these things come together to make an ecosystem. So an ecosystem can be something as big as the entire Earth, or it can be something as small as a little tiny ant walking on the ground. Okay, the ant is alive, the ground is not. That's a living and non-living thing interacting. That makes up an ecosystem. And so if you were an ecologist, you could study them. And so an ecologist is a pretty cool job. And for those of you who are really into science, this is a great thing for you to start thinking about. An ecologist gets to spend a lot of time outdoors, which is really cool. I know you guys love being outside. And you also get to conduct experiments in laboratories. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get to be outside, watching the way different organisms interact with each other, but then you also get to go inside and collect your data, and you get to like analyze the pond water and see what's in it, to see what's making the fish thrive or what's making a frog become sick. You get to do a little bit of everything. So if you're into science, an ecologist is a cool job. And this guy's an ecologist, so I'm going to show you what he does kind of on a daily basis.
I'm doing a job which I absolutely love doing, and it's brilliant. I look at the effect that humans are having on the environment, and in particular to look at the effect that we're having on habitat fragmentation, so splitting up good habitats into smaller areas, and in particular looking at the effect on flowers and the insects that pollinate those flowers. When I'm in the field, what I do is I survey for the plants, and so I'll be laying out transects, counting the individual species of plants that are present there, and also do surveys for and count and identify insects which are visiting those flowers. And they might be things like bumblebees, other sorts of bees and wasps, hoverflies, and a whole load of other flies, all of which are really important to the pollination of these plants. I'm taking the data that I've collected in the field and then using that in the computer to then ask the question, what happens if the rare plants go? What's the impact on the insects that depend on them? Or what happens if the bumblebees disappear? How many species of plant could go extinct? And the key thing is that we humans rely on nature, and so therefore if we lose species, then that will affect our survival and our well-being. And taking bumblebees, but also hoverflies for instance, they pollinate many flowers, including flowers which produce crops for food for us to eat. So one of the really exciting things I think about my project is the fact that I'm collecting data in the way that perhaps Victorians would have collected data, but analysing it using the very latest techniques and producing fresh answers and a fresh understanding of our world, which is brilliant.
So that's definitely something for you guys to keep in mind. It's a fun job. You have to see how everything impacts each other. And as he referred to in the video, it's not just animals, it's human beings, and how our actions affect the rest of the environment, and how the environment affects our life as we know it. And so if you guys are interested in that, I think you should kind of keep that in the back of your mind. If you love science, you get to investigate almost anything you want. You could come up with a problem and say, I wonder why the frogs in this stream are not surviving. And that can be a project you spend a year on. You go out to the stream every day, you analyze the frogs, you collect them, you take them into your laboratory, you watch them hop around, you analyze the food samples, the soil, the water quality. You get to do a lot of different fun aspects. So keep that in mind. Some of you guys would be really great at that. Last thing that we're going to talk about with ecosystems is the biosphere. And the biosphere is the part of the earth where living things can live. So the biosphere begins as far down in the soil as a living organism can survive. And so if you dig down to a certain point where there's no more living organisms, you've exited the biosphere. You've gone too deep. And the biosphere also goes as high up as the highest living organism can fly. And so if you get above one of the layers of the atmosphere where there is no oxygen, or maybe you get to where it's really cold, maybe somehow you get in the mesosphere, then things are not going to be surviving there. And so the biosphere is a combination of all the different environments on Earth where things can live. And so if there's something living there, it's in the biosphere. And the biosphere is a bunch of different places. Examples of ecosystems in the biosphere: we got deserts, mountains, rivers, prairies, wetlands, forests, plains, and oceans. That's just a very few examples of the ecosystems. Like I talked about earlier, an ecosystem can be something really tiny. Okay, an ecosystem is you holding a pencil. That's you're living, the pencil is non-living. You're interacting. You're writing down information. And so it doesn't have to be this huge elaborate forest with 1,000 trees and 10 different types of animals running around in different homes. It can be something really small. And so that's what an ecosystem is. All right, guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I will see you all in class tomorrow.